Hey guys, welcome back. I'm David and we're here in my shop where I build E-War guitars. You know, I want to build the very best guitars that I could possibly build. And I've discovered over the last few years that having really good tools, really good precision tools, is absolutely necessary to do really good precision work. And this next tool I'm going to acquire is this bench right here that I'm making myself. Now you may think that a bench is nothing more than a table or a surface to work on, but it's so much more than that. This is a Split Top Roubo, and it's going to have a leg vise in this end down here. It's going to have a tail vise in this end here, and it's going to get two 3.5 inch thick, absolutely rock solid, perfectly flat tops on it. And you can see those, they're right over there in the corner. And they're going to go on this pretty soon. Anyway, that's the next job I'm working on, and I'm really excited about it. It's gone along really great. And in this video, I'm assembling this base to this workbench. And I'm using all mortise and tenon joinery, and I hope you like it. Anyway, I'm going to get going with the video right now, and I hope you dig it. And if you do, how about you give me a like and subscribe. Anyway, thanks for watching. Okay, so I've decided how I'm going to do my legs. I've set up my bandsaw over there to cut these tenons on the top. And so I'm just going to go around the edge, and I'm going to mark 1 inch everywhere all the way around. And I'm going to mark 1 inch on the ends too. And I set my fence on my bandsaw. These inch marks are just to basically show me where to stop cutting. And I'm going to run the bandsaw in all the way around, and it's going to cut this nice tenon. And I don't know if you can see those marks on there, but I left it just a little bit shy. And I'm going to set my router up on a jig and a pattern bit, and I'm going to go ahead and make the finished cut all the way around with my router. So anyway, that's what I'm going to do right now. I'm going to use my my marking gauge and go around and mark 1 inch on everything. So whenever I'm marking with that marking gauge, it leaves such a fine little line. It's a beautiful line to follow, but it's kind of hard to see, so I always darken it in with my pencil afterwards. Then I set my router. In this case, I set it at 1 inch depth. And as long as those boards are square and straight and all the faces are planed nicely, I mean, it comes out perfect. Then I made me a little jig for routering the end. Just slip right over the top, clamp it on there, and I used my little trim router in this, which was nice. Now I'm going to proceed to do the same thing on all of the stretchers. These are a little bit different depth. I think these were 2 inches long. So I set it, went through them all, cut all the shoulders. And then I reset it, and then I went back and took, now these are 1/2 inch shoulders on these, and on the other one they're a 1 inch shoulder, so I had to set it one more time. But basically followed the same process all the way through, and they came out very nice. I was pleased for my first time. Okay, so I've got all of my tenons rough cut out of my bandsaw. And now I'm going to get ready. I'm going to set up with my router to go ahead and route these all and bring them right into the perfect spot where I want it. If you could see right here, I'll try to zoom in on that. So I scored this line with my marking gauge originally before I bandsawed these out. And then I bandsawed them short. I set the fence on my bandsaw. I bandsawed it short. I left about a 32nd of an inch, maybe even a little bit less than that, of extra to trim off. And that's what I'm going to trim off with my router. So I made this quick little jig off camera right here. Very simple. It's just the inside dimensions of this are the exact width and height of these legs. The legs made out of ash. I made this one here too because my heart pine top stretchers are slightly different in size. So I made 2 little jigs, very quick, take about 5 minutes to make one. Anyway, so what I'm gonna do is I'm gonna slide this now right up. Oh, by the way, once I put this all together, I then trimmed it off of my miter saw back there and made them perfectly square in all directions. At any rate, so now all I have to do is I'm gonna put this on there. I'm gonna slide this up into place, take my clamp, clamp it on. Now I want to make sure I'm hitting my scored lines all the way around, and I can see that I am. So my little jig I made here is laying out perfectly with the tenons already marked and sawed. Anyway, I'm going to set that on there. And so now my shoulder is going to be a 1/2 inch deep all the way around, and my template is 3/4 inch thick. So I set my router, I've already got it set up, but I set my router to 1.25 inches deep. See if I get this guy around here. So I'm exactly 1.25 inches deep. So when I router this, it should plane it off really nice on all sides and get my line cut really straight. Anyway, that's what I'm going to set up and start doing right now. I'm going to get all these done, and then we're going to move on to cutting the mortises into the legs. So let's get rolling with that, and we'll see how it goes. So I did a couple of these with the 3-sided little jig template I made, and I decided it would probably be easier and better to add the 4th side on it. So I did that. So I just basically screwed on one other side, and it slipped up and down on the board real nice, like that. Once I set it, just clamp it on and go. And this actually gave me a little wider, when I'm doing this narrow side there, it gave me a little wider base for my router to sit on, which made it a little more stable. So, but it worked really nice. Cleaned up, they cleaned up really, really well. Only had a little bit of trim to do on a couple of them when I actually went to finally assemble the parts. But not too bad at all. You can see I ran a couple of screws in there, and that I ran it into the bottom side of the bottom stretcher, so they'll never be seen. And it kept that little jig on there real nice and tight. I wouldn't have done that on the side of a board if you were ever going to be able to see it, but you'd have to get underneath the bench to look up and see them, so I thought it'd be all right. Okay, so before I make my mortising jig, I decided to go ahead and start laying out these legs. And I did the first one here off camera because I wanted to get my bearings straight and kind of figure out how I wanted to do it without wasting time me trying to video the thing. But anyway, so I've laid out the first one, and I'm going to continue laying out the rest of the next. But so what I've done here, I've got my mortises laid out in this thing. I've actually, before I even started, I laid out each of these legs. I wrote on here face, and this is the front right leg. This is the face of it. This will be the end. That faces inwards, and that side faces inwards also. So at any rate, so I've started laying out my mortises, and what I'm going to do, I'm going to make a jig that will, that's the size. I have 2 different size mortises to make, and this is one of them, and these upper guys are slightly different, only because my timbers I made for this are a little bit bigger. Yeah, so I wound up making 3 different templates for the 3 different shape holes I had to use on this. And rather than trying to cut a perfectly rectangular, square, perfect hole in the middle of a piece of MDF, I went ahead and just glued up multiple pieces that the end result was a hole that was the perfect size for my tenons. And of course I put a center line on it, on each of the holes, and that center line was what I wound up lining up with my reference point on each leg. So yeah, so I just put it together like this, put a little glue on it, and wound up with a perfectly square, straight, flush, smooth hole with nice corners. And that little spacer block I have in there is what I used, that's the actual size of the length of the tenon. So I use that as a little additional help. So I just basically screwed a fence on the edge, and it gave me, on 2 of them, it gave me a 1/2 inch shoulder, and on one of them, it was a 1 inch shoulder. So it was real simple, just worked well. and the tenons fit beautiful. Okay, so I made 3 of these guys here based on the size of the tenon and also based on the offset they are back from the face of the work here. So anyway, once I did that, I went ahead and laid out one of the legs to make sure I had my distances correct and everything. And then so when I laid them out, I then just found the center line, which this one's 7 1/16 off of the bottom, and this one's like 1 7/8 off of the top. And then I simply, let me see here, I simply line my center line up on the center line where I have it marked, provided I use the proper jig for that particular stretcher, and then just drill out and route away. This piece of cake. So anyway, I'm going to get going with that right now. So yeah, I laid my dimension lines out and then used the template to mark out the holes. Then I just went with my, I think that's a 5/8 drill bit to drill out the bulk of the material on my drill press. All the way, almost all the way to depth, but I let the router cut the final depth and the final width, of course, too. So yeah, I just clamp my little template on there, drop my router in, and start routing away. Now that bit I have is only 1 inch tall, so that's not enough to go, the depth of a 2-inch deep mortise and the template. So once I routed the top half of the mortise, then I remove the template and just drop my router in there and finish it off. And the bearing then is just following the hole that the template had just created. So yeah, so I just clamped it on and reproduced that same thing about 12 times. So it all came out. It still took some fitting, and I promise you it took a lot of chiseling too to clean up the corners and get everything just right. So this is my first time doing this sort of thing, so it was probably a little tougher on me than the guys that do mortises all the time, mortise and tenon all the time. But it feels real good when you slip that thing in there and it fits really nice and snug. A little work to do on this guy too. So yeah, out of all of them, there was a couple of them I had to really work on with my chisels. I had multiple different pieces using, I had 3 templates making all of 12 holes. So if there was a slight variation in the original thickness of the stretcher or whatever, then it set that off a little bit. But it wasn't too bad. It wasn't too bad. All in all, it came out really nice and tight, and everything went together well. Of course, here I'm actually fitting it together for the first time with all the pieces and parts in. Just kind of tapped it together with my hammer a little bit just to check all the fits and make sure it was square and everything was straight. And it came out really well. I was really happy with it. Okay, this next part could get a little bit tricky. I've decided to use the barrel bolts that Benchcraft had supplied to hook the 2 end components, the 2 end trestles, I guess you call them, into the front and back long stretchers at the bottom. So what I've got to do, now I've already drilled this hole here. I've got the hole here. I got a little countersink for the washer, and this bolt, 1/2 inch bolt's got to travel through a 1/2 inch hole, and that thing is 8 inches long. It's got to go all the way through this thing, like so. As you can see, it comes out in the dead center of the mortise, and that's got to go through the very center, the end of that tenon, all the way in, and it's going to sink into this, stretcher, and I've got to drill this guy in from the back side. And that 1/2 inch bolt's got to go through a 1/2 inch hole for 8 inches and hit dead center of that thing when it hits this center stretcher. And that's a 1 inch thing, and it's called for being drilled in a 1 inch hole. So I got a feeling there's going to be a wrestling match involved. But I'm ready to get going. I'm going to lay this thing out, start drilling, and see if I can't get it to hit. So I was super careful laying this out. I mean, I checked and rechecked my measurements, and I was just trying to be as dead accurate as possible. And as you can see, I already have the leg drilled. I drilled that on my drill press, and that was really my guide for running the bit all the way through into the stretcher, which is probably a good part of the reason that it worked out so well. I'd have drilled those stretchers on the drill press too, but mine isn't tall enough to put that length of board in there. I think it's going in. I'll be damned. That worked all right. I mean, dead square. How about that? The shit you worry about sometimes goes good. Okay, so the next step is I have to create the base shelf in here, and I just have some 1x6 tongue and groove pine that I use in my house construction. I had some left over, so I thought I'd use it. And I don't know why I didn't show it, but I did dado out the bottom stretchers with a 3/4 inch router bit to hold these things up. And I went ahead and laid it out so I could center up the board so they have equal size end pieces on each end of the shelf. Then I just proceeded to cut them out to fit. So now I'm getting ready to assemble the two end assemblies, the trestles on the ends, and I've glued up my stretcher and put them in. Now I'm using oak dowels, 1/2 inch oak dowels, and I do it in a draw board fashion, which means when you drive them in, it actually pulls the two members together very tightly. It really worked well. Now I'm just getting set up doing the other side. A little bit of glue, doesn't need too much. Okay, so now I'm getting ready to put the two long stretchers in with the barrel bolts. I think the reason that Benchcrafted does it this way is this bench could be disassembled into just a few components and lay flat. You know, I guess if you wanted to transport it somewhere, you could, you know, that'd be a good way to do it. Now I'm cutting the notches around my shelf pieces to fit around the legs. That was a real nice, clean way to do that shelf. It looks really good. Now I just slip the pieces in until I get to the other end. Then I got to wrestle with it a little bit to get the other end assembly put on. But it really looks slick when it's all done. So once I got that thing cut, I decided it was better to go ahead and kind of slip it into the end assembly first and then sort of wrestle this thing together. It was a little bit of work, but it wasn't too bad. I got it after a while. I put in my couple of bolts there, and that's it. That base is rock solid, locked in and ready to go. So yeah, here I'm sawing off the excess of the dowels I used, the oak dowels. That's just a little kind of a cheapy dovetail saw. And I'm just sawing them as close to flush as I can. And then I'm proceeding to sand. I've used my DA sander for all the big flat areas. I think I started with 80 grit and I worked my way up to 120 and then 180 was the highest grit I used. And of course, on all the edges, I went back around and I hand sanded them with all the same grits. Hand sanding corners and edges is really much better than a power sander. You can get it much rounder and smoother. So now I'm putting on a little finish. Look at how it brings out that color. I'm using True Oil. I've used it on several guitars that I've built, and I just love the stuff. Works really well, and it really brings out a beautiful color. Just makes that old antique art pine, just gives a really rich, beautiful, rich glow. Looks good on the ash and the pine on the shelf too. It really looks cool. I really like the way the contrasting colors between the old antique wood and the new stuff looks too. This is really a cool build. I really enjoyed the heck out of it.